Benvenuti and welcome to another Anglo-Italian podcast live stream for this Monday night football review. And as you can tell, it's just me this time in a hot seat hosting for this particular live stream, but I am joined by a good friend again. We call him the Bermondsey Bruiser. That is Kieran Hill. Kieran, mate, how are you doing this evening?
I'm very good, very busy, but very good. Doing well.
Yes, we were talking offline. Obviously, you've got quite a stressful next few days, but hopefully it'll get easier as the week goes on. But how was your weekend of football, more importantly?
Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. Obviously, Millwall season now over, so
Yes.
managed to just watch a lot of neutral games, and there were some good games. Other than I was very disappointed in the Championship playoffs that I decided to watch, and there was no goals. But other than that, there was some very good football on. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's fair to say it's like the Championship's kind of been lauded up as kind of the most exciting of the leagues outside of the European leagues anyway. And it was disappointing to see both ties being 0-0. So it kind of maybe intensifies the second leg. I don't know about you, but yeah, I'll be fascinated to see how it goes along. And welcome to those that are joining us live. If you happen to be joining us on Instagram, all I have to say is apologies for last week when we did do this live stream. I missed a load of your comments and questions as we went along. So it seems like it didn't really work or didn't come through to the program software. God knows what happened there. So apologies in advance. But if you do happen to have any kind of thoughts or questions, please feel free to join us on Twitter or X or also on the YouTube channel and get your questions there. That would be really appreciated. But Kieran, we are blessed with so much football to talk about. Obviously, we're going to talk about the beloved Arsenal for Rory because, 1-0 to the Arsenal as they commandeered themselves to ensure that the kind of championship or title race at least extends to the last day of the season. We'll talk about the relegation battle. So unfortunately, we say goodbye to Luton. Although it's mathematically kind of certain that they'll go down, we just have to say goodbye to them, as well as Burnley. Burnley, we'll talk about them. And we've also got to talk about how great Palace are. We talked about it last week, and boy, they just seem to be pushing new levels. But also, Kieran, we'll talk about Serie A. Bologna have made it into the Champions League for the first time in their history. Gasperini, we've got to talk about him. Juventus sliding, which is going to please a lot of neutral fans, let's put it that way, maybe not Juventus fans. And we'll talk about the relegation battle. So if you've got any questions about that, please feel free to chip in as we go along. But more importantly, Kieran, let's start off by talking about 1-0 to the Arsenal. Yes, we did see Arsenal do a comprehensive job. I mean, it wasn't spectacular by any stretch of imagination. And I don't know about you, Kieran, but I got the feeling that maybe the moment kind of caught up with them and, there was a bit of nervousness. Certainly raised a few question marks, maybe about certain personnel. Like I felt like Odegaard is starting to get maybe a bit sussed out. Is being a bit too predictable with the way he plays in the final third. Saka, again, a bit of an underwhelming performance. However, that said, Man United didn't really offer us much. And obviously, Casemiro kind of lives up to the pub-style footballer that he is at the moment because, it was his mistake that led to the goal. Before we kind of talk about maybe how Man United get out of this, the kind of issues that they've got going on and maybe also speculate about Arsenal, how did you feel about the actual match? Did it live up to the expectations or do you think it was kind of really damp squib of a game?
I think it was an interesting one because I was saying before the game I thought it'd be really high scoring and that it would be end to end, like how United have been playing recently. It's just been end to end stuff, and like they've looked really open and everything like that. But I thought the actual game itself was a lot more sort of cautious than I thought it'd be. And I thought that despite the fact that United were playing Casemiro and Evans as centre backs, they didn't look too. It didn't look like Arsenal could exploit them as much as maybe you'd have thought they would have. Especially with the quality, like you say, like with Saka and Odegaard in the team, you'd expect them to do a lot more. But I think Man United almost felt like they were happy with 1-0 loss, so that it wasn't, it didn't get embarrassing for them. That's the way it felt to me. Obviously, I know they were pushing for a goal, but Arsenal were obviously happy with a win, and then United just seemed to not really sort of ever click into fifth gear at any point. I didn't think. And I think the game management wasn't great either from either side.
No, it certainly wasn't. I felt like in the first kind of 10 to 15 minutes, I felt like Man United did relatively okay, nothing spectacular. And I wouldn't say offensively they offered too much. I think they were trying as much as they could to kind of ping in balls into the box, and without having that kind of physical or target man like attack, I'd say they really did struggle, and there was a lot of question marks about Rasmus Højlund. There's been a lot of leaks even today about speculative kind of speculation that maybe the players don't necessarily trust Højlund in terms of the style of football. They're not too sure whether he can do the business up top. But I think what was interesting was obviously Man United didn't really have a lot of quality coming off the bench. You know, they had to rely on kids for this match. So in some respects, maybe they felt that this was quite respectable. But in terms of what they offered on the pitch, I don't think they necessarily had a lot of outlet or attacking flair. And it was very much relied upon Garnacho. Now, as much as Garnacho's had a relatively, I'd say, quite a good season, in my eyes anyway, his kind of end products seems to be really suspect for this game. And I don't know if it's also a case of that maybe the occasion caught up with him because he was trying to do so much of the kind of being the kind of person that would offer that kind of quality. And I think it was just too much for him to be expected of. But as you allude to, I think also Ten Hag has to take a bit of the share of responsibility here because he didn't really offer too much in terms of like how they're going to kind of penetrate through this Arsenal team. And I felt like the defense were quite, stable. They weren't really threatened. And even midfield wise, I think they kind of took the sting out of the game. They made sure that the passes were quite long, taking the sting out of the passing as well. I mean, is that from my point of view, I think that's a sign of a good side that's managed this occasion quite well. Whereas if on the flip side, you look at Man United, they really didn't do much, did they?
No, not at all. I just the thing is, I think once you go 1-0 up, you can go one of two ways. You can either sort of push on and go for that second, or like what Arsenal have sort of learnt to do is not necessarily push on. And obviously, I know they've been battering a couple of teams, but in these massive games, the only thing that matters is literally just the 3 points. And I think United just simply weren't, like you say, they weren't clinical enough, they weren't creative enough. And without Bruno Fernandes, they really struggled because you go from having Bruno Fernandes in the number 10 role to having McTominay, one of the most creative midfielders in the league, to McTominay is not a swap that they would have sort of welcomed. And I think they found it really difficult to create. But yeah, I know what you're saying about. I think Arteta did manage them fairly well in the defensive aspect, and then just sort of the game off. And I didn't really think that I think they had 2-3 shots on target the whole game, and they were all, and one of them was Casemiro sort of basically just passing it to Raya at one point. So like I don't think that United really posed enough danger to them, really.
Let's get on the topic then of Casemiro. Obviously, as I alluded to in the intro, it was his mistake that led to the goal. I think it was quite clever running from Kai Havertz, and I think he's shown that this season. But Casemiro, obviously, there's probably a thinking that maybe his legs isn't good enough for a midfield battle, but good enough to kind of maybe step back and ping those balls. And you could see it on occasions that he was pinging these long balls, crossfield balls, to ensure that they started counter-attacking teams. But in particular against Arsenal, they tried to do it and it maybe didn't work out as well. But Casemiro, obviously, there's a large question mark about his future. There was a big point that was made today about Casemiro that it's all well kind of saying, he needs to be moved on and, living up to the kind of that Carragher kind of little insult that he shared with him last week, don't let the football catch up with you kind of thing. But with Casemiro, you need someone that's going to be willing to pay or buy his services. Now, given that, you're kind of relying on someone from Saudi or maybe MLS, do you think that's realistically going to come in this summer? Because he's on quite some handsome wages. That's going to be some bargaining tool to try and get him off the books and get him to move on, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's clear that he has just gone from literally being one of the best like defensive minded midfielders in the world,
Mm.
to be in like looking completely out of his depth in the like he looks, as you say, he looked awful against Arsenal, and he's looked pretty terrible all season. His legs seem to have gone, and he just doesn't look like the same player. And I do agree that I think the options for United are you ship him, like you sort of move him out to Saudi, but that's if they're willing, even Saudi are willing to pay his wages, because he's a big name. But at the end of the day, the main aim of the Saudi league is, like any league, to get as many quality players in as possible. And whether Casemiro is actually going to even strengthen the quality even in that league is questionable. I think it's there's no European sides that are going to want to take on the burden of having him at all. So I think it's really Saudi or bust for United, because I think there's a few players in that team that they need to get rid of, because the attitude is not. It's clearly the dressing room is lost. And I think they're going to be looking to Saudi for a lot of their players. But whether they decide to sign Casemiro, I don't think it'd be a smart signing even for a Saudi side to do, to be honest.
No, this is very true. And there was a lot of rumours that he might be tempted to go back to Brazil. But even then, I suspect that he'll need a little bit of a compensation package from Man United to shift him on. So we shall wait and see. But I mean, obviously, the biggest kind of question mark for Man United right now is, do they let Ten Hag stay at the helm at least until the FA Cup? Because there's a nice little stat that I'll read out to you now, Kieran, which is, if Man United lose the FA Cup final against Man City and finish 7th in the league, they could be forced to play a 2-legged playoff in mid-August just to gain qualification into the Europa Conference League. So this is just for them to even play Europe. Now, I did speak with Dell last week, and his opinions was just get rid of him at this point. And I was much of the same opinion. But, even if you do get rid of him now, do you think anyone that comes in is going to kind of generate that kind of bounce back effect for the players and give them confidence ahead of that final?
See, my question mark there is, I feel like you have to wait till the end of the season. Just when it gets to this point in the season, I don't think it's a wise idea to rush into a managerial point and a sort of decision in a football club that big. I think it's best to at least give him till the end of the season, just because, not because of anything that he's necessarily done, just purely because you don't want to have a caretaker manager in for a game as big as the FA Cup final.
Yeah.
And as much as I don't think that they're going to cause City many problems in the FA Cup final, I can't see sacking Ten Hag before the end of the season being a good move for them.
Well, we shall wait and see, but I suspect it's not going to happen this side of things anyway. So I think we'll leave the Arsenal and Man United chat there, because obviously Arsenal are going to have to rely on a certain favour from their neighbours midweek against Man City. But let's talk about City, because they absolutely demolished Fulham. And I suppose my posing question to you, Kieran, is, did City kind of, with their dominance, really show that they had superiority over Fulham, or were just Fulham just rubbish because they didn't offer anything in this match?
Yeah, I think that one of the important things is, obviously, Fulham are on the beach now. They've got nothing really to play for there, so I think that didn't help. But City were just at their ruthless best, really. They were just incredible, really. So I think it's a bit of both in terms of City. When they want to be, they can beat anyone, and the fact that Fulham literally had sort of nothing to play for, and as I say, they're on the beach, and the game didn't matter anywhere near as much to them as it would to City. Obviously, City can't afford to drop any points, because Arsenal will most likely win the league if they do. So yeah, I think the fact that Fulham had enough to play for really played into it, but City just looked dominant in the attacking third. They were at their clinical best. Everyone, I even saw Haaland make like a few tackles on Fulham players, which you don't see Haaland do much other than sort of just score. But he was all over the place against Fulham. So interesting to see that. And yeah, I thought it was they dominated.
Yeah, and there's one player that I wanted to highlight, which was Josip Gvardiol. I thought he had a really good game. He's been really impressive in the last few games, and obviously, in particular, it seems like he's starting to grow with an understanding of his role now. If you compare him to the earlier part of the season, where maybe didn't necessarily have that conviction about playing that role that Pep wanted him to play. But you can see he's adapted really well in more recent games, offering in the attacking kind of aspects. And it reminded me a bit of Emmanuel Kanji when he first came to the club. There wasn't like that huge expectation given that he came from Dortmund. I certainly didn't see the Kanji that we see these days, but he's adapted so well. And then I thought, well, with Gvardiol, that's going to be a hell of a transition for him because he's more predominantly a centre back than a kind of progressive kind of centre back, shall we say? Because I think that's where it seems to be going in terms of footballing tactics world, that there needs to be like that kind of adaptive centre back that can cover at that left back position, and that's what Gvardiol has been utilised as for the majority of this season anyway. So it was interesting to see how he's progressed in more recent games, and he's definitely offering that outlet. But I suppose this is going to be the test for Man City, right? Because they face Spurs now. Spurs are kind of like a nemesis for them in terms of performance. It seems to be like, yeah, Spurs can get a result. However, you've got that aspect for Spurs now that they kind of rely or need to rely on Liverpool right now, which they're handsomely beating Aston Villa 2-1 as we speak right now, whilst we do this live stream. So that could go in their favour, right? But yeah, then you've got Spurs doing a favour for their North London rivals, Arsenal. So I know that's kind of taken a lot of social media accounts to go absolutely berserk with the assumptions, but I can suspect that Big Ange is going to ensure that they kind of give a performance, regardless if they concede lots of goals or whether they actually, win this match. But yeah, do you think Man City have it within them to potentially over these next few days lose or give something like a ray of light to Rory and the Arsenal fan base?
Yeah, I think like obviously history does a lot of the talking for us a lot, and like Spurs have they just always seem to be City's one and only bogey team in the Premier League, and I genuinely do think that comes into play a bit, and I still saying all that I still do think City will get the job done just based on how much better they've looked than Spurs in like recent weeks, but I can see, as you say, I think Big Ange, I think he's going to really big the players up for it, sort of say, block out the social media content that you're seeing from your own fan base and just go out there and, they're still in the fight for Champions League. They need to, they need to win it just as much as City do. So it's one of them ones where Ange he'll be making sure those players give 110%. And I still don't think it'll be enough to beat City. I think City, especially at this point in the season, they always just seem to sort of click into gear and just not drop any points. So I feel like that could be the outcome on tomorrow. So yeah.
Do you think like City have hoodwinked everyone to kind of give that feeling that this title is a bit closer than it actually is? Because like we've kind of all craved for an end of season where actually the title's still up for grabs. I think the last time we had that was when obviously we had that famous Aguero moment, right? And Man City were so close with Man United, but we haven't had it that close for a number of years. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting dynamic. But before we kind of move on to Spurs, West Ham, do you think they could spring a surprise on Man City? They don't have a great record, and the game is obviously at the Etihad, so that probably goes in City's favour in that respect. But you expect with David Moyes' last game that he's going to want to maybe cause a ruckus. He may want to try and cause a bit of a scene for at least City or get them thinking, because if you remember that game when Man City did beat QPR had to fight for their lives on that particular day, obviously, because they weren't too sure of their survival. But West Ham have got nothing to play for apart from pride, and potentially this is Moyes' last game. And, I think there's a few Moyes loyalists within that squad that might want to give him a game to remember, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think obviously I think West Ham fans will say that Moyes is a club legend because he's won them their first European trophy.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that wanted him out this year, which I do understand. But I can't see them getting anything. I think it's Spurs. It's either Spurs beat City or City win the league, or Spurs even draw to City actually. But I think if City beat Spurs, I think that's done. I can't see West Ham getting anything away at City when City really have to win that game. And as you say, West Ham aren't really playing for anything anymore. So I can't see them. I can see City absolutely battering West Ham last game of the season if it comes down to that.
Well, yeah, if anything, let's allude to it now. So we are now officially saying bye-bye to Burnley. And although not mathematically yet, we are definitely going to probably say goodbye to Luton because they have to overturn a ridiculous goal deficit. And ironically, it's the two sides that we talked about. So West Ham obviously beating Luton 3-1 and Spurs beating Burnley 2-1 to condemn them into the Championship for next season. If we start off by talking about Burnley, the downfall kind of seems very obvious from the offset because of Kompany's kind of style of football and obviously his reluctance to kind of change it up. But where do we stand on Kompany? Because I think there's kind of interesting thoughts when it comes to what we think about Vincent Kompany. When he came up with Burnley, there was talk about, progressive football, they've changed the style of football under him. And he was marauded for that style of football. And there was that feeling, he could have been the Spurs manager, ironically, because at the beginning of the season, he was tipped as the hot favourite potentially to replace, at the time, Antonio Conte at Spurs. But yeah, when we look at it in the grand scheme of things, obviously he's been a bit found out. He did tweak it towards the end of the season, a bit late. But when we compare it to, say, Big Ange, for example, everyone kind of doesn't really kind of say, his philosophy is letting him down necessarily. There's still a faith within the Spurs fan base anyway. And general football fans, I think they appreciate his style of football. But where's that kind of balance between the two? Because obviously Kompany's trying to play that with probably you could argue a lesser side. They haven't got the kind of rich talents that, say, Spurs have. But, should they be rewarded or should they be rewarded for the style of football, at least trying to play that style of football? Or does there need to be a balance in terms of pragmatic style of football and those kind of games where you should be playing that kind of tiki-taka style of football?
Yeah, I think it's it comes down to it where I think if you can play that football in the Championship, it never necessarily means that you can play it in the Premier League. And obviously their style of football, as a Championship fan, I saw they were unbeatable in the Championship when they played that style of football. And then you can completely see why Kompany would be like, well, why would I change that? Because he's been winning every game in the Championship. I know he wasn't. I'm not saying he was stupid and thought it was going to be just as easy, but I think he would have looked at it as, why would I change a winning formula? Don't fix it if it ain't broke. And then they've come in and it just didn't, when you're playing against the likes of Man City, Liverpool, you just can't get away with trying to play it out from the back and all that sort of stuff. I mean, and they just look. I think it was just too little, too late when they did change it up. And I think that you do need to find the balance in terms of when you're playing against maybe the Lutons and the Sheffield Uniteds and even the Nottingham Forest of the league, you can maybe get away with playing that rich brand of football. But when you're against the cities and everything, they know that brand of football better than anyone. So it's hard to master it against the masters themselves.
This is it. In terms of Spurs, they look better, they look more themselves, it's fair to say. I mean, it probably helped by the fact that it was against Burnley. But what was very obvious is that they clearly need number 9. And Mickey van der Ven's goal, that looks like a finish of a number 9, it's fair to say. But where do kind of Spurs look towards next season in terms of who do you think they need to bring in to maybe progress them in terms of maybe pushing them into the top 4? Because I don't know necessarily if they can do anything higher than the top 4 because, all the other clubs are going to be spending a lot more money in this summer. I'm speculating here, but do you think there's a number of areas that Spurs need to kind of reinforce before we can kind of start thinking about them being in top 4 contention?
Yeah, I think depth in general will be massive for Spurs to get in, because I think just the squad depth, when Maddison was injured, for instance, and I mean, I
Yeah.
know they had a lot of injuries, but their squad was so thin that you could really tell with each of those main players, of each of Maddison and Van der Ven were the main ones that come to mind to me. When those two players got injured, it looked really ropey for them. And I think in general, they need squad depth. But I think a number 9 would be hugely beneficial to
Yeah.
them, because I love Son. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant player, but I don't think he's a great finisher. But I don't think he's necessarily an out and out number 9 who
Yeah.
you can put there. But I think with Ange's brand of football, you need also a ball winning midfielder as well. I do like Sarr, but I think
Yeah.
they could replace him and have him as a backup, maybe Sarr, and
Mm.
because I think they need another world class player in the midfield. So I'd like
Yeah.
to see them sign a number 9 and a centre midfielder.
Yeah, I think it's been obvious, that Kane aspect has taken a bit of a aspect out of that squad. It hasn't been the same. And I think if you had Kane in that squad right now, potentially you could be saying that Spurs are a lot higher in the standings. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think Basuma has flattered to deceive at times. And like you alluded to earlier as well, Maddison, I feel like since his injury and he's coming back, he's actually been not really the same player that we know about. I personally haven't been that impressed with his performances of late, and I feel he should have been dropped personally a lot sooner than he did. But it does go to kind of show that maybe they are lacking that kind of creative spark as well in the middle of the park, and potentially you need a combination of different midfielders to offer different things. So it'll be an interesting summer for Spurs. If we quickly move into Luton, obviously I think everyone kind of had them down to go rock bottom, but they proved everyone wrong, especially with the style of football under Rob Edwards. And I think what's been interesting to kind of look in terms of the comments so far is that Luton Town fans have been very proud of this performance and this season, bit gutted that maybe it's come to this point in the season where they've kind of in the last few games let it slip to an extent. The performances have been as strong as they have been for the majority of the season. But there's a lot to be optimistic, and there's a feeling, Rob Edwards has now got the summer to bring in his own players, and that's going to be the interesting kind of summer for Luton Town, as well as Rob Edwards. Are you personally gutted that we're not going to see Luton next season?
Yeah, I am. I think they're like a brilliant addition to the league. I mean, I know there were loads of sort of memes on Twitter about it, but it's quite remarkable having a stadium like that in the like biggest, most popular league in the world, having a stadium like that. It's crazy, and I loved it. I think it's brilliant. So I am quite gutted that they're going down, but I think what I liked about the team is that they kept their attacking brand of football. I know we were saying about Company and maybe didn't adapt enough, but Rob Edwards adapted it enough to make it still entertaining. However, they did have a backbone, and I really at one point was rooting for them to stay up. I said they were going to stay up, and because they were getting those results that you just feel like are the kind of results that see you stay up by a couple points on the last day of the season. Like they were getting those late equalizers and things like that. But yeah, I'm definitely disappointed that they're not going to be in the league next season. They were a good addition.
Yeah, it's one of those that I think they've really surprised the league, especially when they kept the majority of the players that bought them up as well. They had their few additions, obviously Samir Lokonga, who they bought in from Arsenal. Obviously Ross Barkley, it has to be said, he's rejuvenated his career since he's gone to Luton, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's not on the lips of a few Premier League clubs in the summer. But if there's a player that you could pull out of that squad, Kieran, to maybe stay in the Premier League, is there any others that you can think of? Because I think for me, it'd be Elijah Adebayo, because I think he's had a fantastic season, proven as a striker. I think he's really threatened, and, he kind of gives you a really good combination of like being a target man as well as offer that kind of running as well. But yeah, would you agree, or would you add someone else into that mix as well?
Yeah, I'd say Adebayo definitely is worth it, and like Ross Barkley, Doughty, they've had fantastic
Yeah.
seasons, but yeah, I think those three were would be the standout to me. So yeah.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if Kaminsky is also potentially one of those that maybe some clubs will look at. But hopefully for Luton's benefit, they're kept in there. If we quickly just talk about David Moyes as well, that was the last game at the Olympic Stadium or the West Ham Stadium or whatever the hell they call it these days. But more importantly, I wanted to ask you this question because I think this is an interesting question. What do you think David Moyes' legacy is going to be known for at West Ham? Because obviously he split opinions. Obviously, a lot of the fans rightly have wanted to maybe progress away from that David Moyes style of football. A lot of fans or commentators, should we say, have kind of said, be careful what you wish for. But obviously, it's West Ham fans that are watching this week in, week out. They've had enough of David Moyes, and obviously the board have decided to side with them as well. But obviously he's achieved a hell of a lot in that space of time, keeping them up, getting them into European competitions, being so close on so many occasions, and also winning them a European competition in the Conference League itself, which was an amazing achievement when you consider West Ham, they've struggled to be at that stage as well. And at the same time, it has to be said, I feel like he's progressed a lot of those team players as well. If we think about Jared Bowen, for example, he's progressed under him. Even Declan Rice has progressed under David Moyes and enhanced his career as well as his abilities. But do you think David Moyes will be kind of regarded in that light, or do you think he'll be remembered for being 4-4-2, playing Mikel Antonio all the time up front?
I think, I think he'll be remembered for winning the European trophy, and I do believe, I do think that their style of football doesn't necessarily complement their players as much as it could, like for this season especially. But I do think that he will go down. I think he probably took them as far as he could, but I do think he will go down as like a big sort of icon in West Ham's in West Ham lore really. And I think I think he's taken them as far as he can go with them. But I do think that some of the players in a new system could really thrive. The likes of Kudus, Paqueta, Bowen. Yeah. I think they could. I know Bowen, with the Bowen example, he's been improved a lot under Moyes, but I do think that if he moves into a new system, they could really sort of push for top 6 with the side that they've got, I believe.
Yes, definitely. And I do apologise in advance, Kieran. I just realised you are a Millwall fan, so this must be really hard for you to speak about West Ham in a good light. So we'll quickly move on that note, and we'll talk about Poch. Poch is starting to get a tune out of Chelsea. So they did win against Nottingham Forest, but I was pleasantly surprised at the style of football that I was watching. Now, I appreciate it's only Nottingham Forest. They're at the bottom, and, maybe events happen, so it made sure that their survival was intact, so they didn't have to play too much. But they did give Chelsea a bit of a game. But I have to allude to the fact that Chelsea looks quality. I don't say that very often on this podcast, but they did actually look quite good. I can't choose between the Jackson goal or Mudryk, whichever one was the more favourite or the best one to watch. But has Poch kind of turned the corner?
Yeah. I believe so. I think they've got a really young team, so it's always going to take a while to get a tune out of those players because they're so young, and they've not, other than Thiago Silva, they've not really got anyone in the side that's a sort of, I know he's leaving as well, but they've not got anyone in the side that's a sort of natural leader or anything. But like you said, I thought they were unbelievable on Saturday. And as you said, it is Forest, but at the same time, Forest at the City ground, when it's just bouncing, they just found out that they sort of stayed up. So the City ground was like a carnival atmosphere. And to go there and play that level of football against them was quite impressive, actually. And I thought Cole Palmer was unplayable again. But the Mudryk goal was just fantastic. Like the ball from Palmer, perfect weight. Mudryk's run, his pace, finish bottom right. It was just excellent. But yeah, they did look really good. And I think the only way is up really with the youth of their squad as well.
Yeah. And I think there was a really nice point that was made on a different podcast. I do apologise if I don't quote them here, but it is their credit. they did mention about the fact that, you know, it would have been quite easy for Chelsea to have spent more money in this window in January to kind of try and resolve the issues that they were facing at the time. And there was an interesting stat I came across as well, Kieran, which was since Boxing Day, outside of the top 5, Chelsea have accumulated the most points of any of that teams in that kind of table right now in the Premier League. So that goes to show you kind of the turnaround from Poch. And I know in between that, he's had the EFL Cup trophies. They've been obviously in the final of that. They were obviously in the semi-final of the FA Cup as well. So they've built some momentum, and it's helped by players like Cole Palmer, for example. But genuinely, like when I saw them against Nottingham Forest, you saw obviously Reece James back to his best. You know, there just seemed to be more fluidity within the squad. And I suppose I pose this question. Do we have to be a bit careful and maybe take notice of what Chelsea are doing right now? Because that's going to breed a lot of confidence going into that summer. Because, you know, I think there was a lot of question marks. Maybe they're now gelling as a team. Do I dare say it? I don't know if that's genuinely the case. But it does feel like maybe we should maybe kind of consider them to be at least in the top 6 next season.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, like they're only getting better at the moment, and I think they have to be in the conversation for top 6 purely because of the quality they've got in that team. I know they've got a lot of players that are a bit injury prone, which is the only concern. But with when the likes of Nkunku, I mean, we saw on Saturday as soon as Reece James came on, they looked. I mean, I thought they were good the whole game, but they looked a different team when Reece James was on.
Yeah.
They looked unbelievable. And he is like that final piece because he can do it all. And he came on not only the assist, but he played a part in the second goal as well. He sort of started, I think he won the ball back or something, and that's how they started the move. But structurally and everything, they just looked so much better with him on the pitch. And I think it's a big if he can stay fit, I believe they could challenge for top 4 if Reece James was staying fit next season. But I think if not, then I think 6, like top 6 and potentially top 5, they'll be pushing for. But I do think if Reece James stays fit, they could be right up there in the mix.
I genuinely feel if Chelsea were able to go into the summer transfer window and get themselves an established number 9, then we should be considering, you know, Chelsea to be in that mix, certainly, or in that conversation, definitely for next season. But quick word on Nottingham Forest. Obviously, they did manage to survive. I thought that was a really great performance by Callum Hudson-Odoi, ironically against his ex-club. But he started to look quite good in the recent games for Nottingham Forest. But key question mark that I wanted to kind of pose to you, Kieran, do you see Nuno Espirito Santo still there by the middle of next season? And do you think they just need to reinforce wisely next summer, or this summer, should I say?
Yeah, I think they need some smart recruitment rather than what we've been seeing recently, because I feel like I can't remember the owner's name, but the guy who owns them just throws he's almost taking the Bowley approach. Funnily enough, like the Chelsea owner, like he just sort of has just been like, "Oh, I like you, I'll sign you." No sort of strategy to these recruitments. And don't get me wrong, they've made some good signings, but I just think it's all a little bit random. When they sign someone, they'll sign like a few players in the same position, and it doesn't seem like it's that tactically done, the recruitment. But hopefully they've learnt their lesson, and hopefully they know that in order for them to be successful next season, they need to recruit smartly. But I think with the right squad, Nuno can do well with them, because obviously we've seen him like, I feel like their aim for next season will be to be sort of like an established mid-table side. And we've seen Nuno do that with teams before, with the right backing, like at Wolves. So we'll see. I mean, Tottenham was a step too far for him, but at Wolves, he did a great job and like established them as a mid-table / pushing for Europe side at one point. So yeah, I think they should sort of keep faith in him, and hopefully it will work out for them.
Let's see. And I quickly do want to move on just to this last point, and we'll just give it a minute or two, Kieran. But Palace can do no wrong as far as I can see. They just look superb. We were purring about them last week. Eberechi Eze and obviously Michael Olise combining here for this match against Wolves, where they beat them 3-1. But, oh my God, like, Elise and Eze just look superb every time we see them for this Palace side. Mateta up top as well. They just seem to be superb. Adam Wharton, obviously, on the cusp of maybe being potentially in the England setup, which would be amazing given his kind of how quickly he's propelled from the Championship to the Premier League and established him this quickly. Just quick question on this. Obviously, Glasner has obviously improved the squad. But where do you think Palace need to improve on in terms of their team, squad, maybe, perhaps, in terms of personnel for next season? Because I can see Oliver Glasner really taking this Palace squad into the top 10 mix. What do you think?
Oh, 100%. I don't see why they can't. There's so many quality teams. I don't want to make a statement of that they can push for, Conference League, but potentially, because honestly, recently they've just looked like a complete different team. And I think with the right recruitment, they can really go somewhere. But I think they definitely need to sign a right back. They haven't. I don't think they've signed a right back since like 2018, 2017.
Joel Ward and Nathan Clyne, isn't it?
Literally, it's been those two since Clyne left Liverpool for them. Like it literally, like they just don't want to sign a right back. But I think they're gonna finally have to splash out some cash on a right back, because I think that going into, if they are to be challenging in the sort of mid-table regions, they are going to need to have a better right back than Nathaniel Clyne. So I'd like to see them sign a right back, and also I think potentially a keeper as well. I don't want to make it
quite controversial there. Quite controversial. They spent, what is it, 30 million on Dean Henderson, wasn't it?
But I'm not sure he's any better than where they are quality wise. I'm not sure he's any better than any of the keepers like above them.
Yeah,
in my opinion. But I mean, maybe I might be wrong. But that's just my opinion. I don't think he's.
I think he still needs time to mature. Personally, that's my feelings. But
potentially,
there's a goalkeeper in him, and I suspect the problem would be is who can push him that bit further. Perhaps someone like a Kaminsky could push him. I don't know if that's the kind of right kind of fit, but that's speculative. Anyway, we shall move on to some Serie A. And I'm going to try my best here, Kieran, to kind of do this chronologically, because obviously we're going to talk about the kind of battle for the top end of the league. But we've also got to allude to the fact that there's a relegation battle that has intensified. And as we were speaking offline, Udinese pull off an amazing result tonight by beating Lecce 2-0, which has just brought them out of the relegation fight into, I think it is now, 15th place.
15th,
And it's so tight. It's so tight. But I'm going to allude to this factor, which is Bologna securing Champions League spot for the first time in their history. Now, prior to this being clarified last night, courtesy of Atalanta beating Roma, they had pulled off an amazing result against Napoli. Now, it's fair to say Napoli have been a bit poor this season, and that was far from the side that we recognised from last season where Napoli dominated Serie A. But Bologna haven't been on a great streak of results. They got 7 out of the last, I think it was 5. So it wasn't looking too pretty. They'd just had a number of draws in that mix. But they got the all-important win here at the Armando Maradona. Obviously, I'm going to allude to the Napoli fan base in a moment, but what I wanted to allude to is how fantastic of an achievement this is for Bologna. Given the context of this isn't a side that's fancy to be in that mix, and under Thiago Motta, he's got them playing some fantastic football. They've got some amazing players. Now, I hate this, and I'm hoping this doesn't happen here, Kieran, but potentially they might get picked apart this summer. Thiago Motta has been long linked with the role at Juventus, even though Juventus still have Massimo Allegri in charge. And then you've got Joshua Zirkzee, who's been fantastic for them. Then you've got the likes of Calafiori, the centre-back, who I think should be in the Italian national squad. If he doesn't get picked this summer, then I think there's going to be some outrage or some blood spilled on the streets of Bologna, that's for sure. But that's only just 2 players. There's, Lewis Ferguson, who's had a fantastic season. Unfortunately, got himself injured more recently, and he's ruled out for the rest of this year. But Bologna, that's a hell of an achievement, right? That is almost like FM levels of achievements, right? We're talking about.
Yeah, what a story. It's unbelievable to see what he's done with them. And I mean, they they got their 2 goals early against Napoli within the first 12 minutes and within 3 minutes of each other, and then just sort of saw the game out and looked comfortable. And they've massively, like you say, it's like an FM save. They've literally just massively achieved. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing them in the Champions League. But I do hope they can keep Thiago Motta, but
yeah,
we'll see. I mean, if they lose him and Xerxes and is it Salamakers as well? He's a great player. Then if they lose them, then it could cause problematic. But if they can recruit well, like they did, obviously with the manager and with some of the players they've got in the squad, who knows? They might just recruit the next Thiago Motta and then because you never know with football. But I mean, it's going to be brilliant to see them in the Champions League next season. I'm looking forward to it a lot.
100% on that point around their recruitment, because that is something that they've nailed really with their recruitment set up. They've really kind of made sure that not only just the players, but in terms of the coaching side, they've got it right. And even Thiago Motta, when he was first installed as the replacement for Sinisa Mihajlovic at the time, you know, Mihajlovic had brought in this kind of aura, you know, brought this camaraderie, you know, and he was kind of seen as one of them. And unfortunately, you know, due to his health at the time, as well as the results on the pitch, you know, Bologna were kind of in the relegation mix. So he pulled him out of that. But yeah, it's taken a while for the fans to win it or get won over by Motta. But you can see the style of football, you know, it's really interesting to watch. And although there's been occasions this season where it hasn't necessarily looked that way, they've genuinely looked the part. And I'm so hoping this summer they can keep hold of him. That's the most important thing that they can do is, you know, you can sell the players, right? The likes of Joshua Xerxes, I suspect, will probably get sold this summer. Salamakers, as you mentioned, he's only on loan at Milan. It's rumoured that he has got a clause that basically means he can be signed by Bologna, but it's a question mark whether Milan decide to fancy and take it up on that option. And Calafiore is another one, you know, Riccardo Orsolini is another good winger that's been proving it for Bologna. He's having his best season for Bologna so far in his career. And again, it wouldn't surprise me if he has a good Euros and potentially there'll be some clubs sniffing around him. But if we allude to Napoli, it's been a disaster of the season. Obviously, Aurelio De Laurentiis has been mucking it up in terms of potentially getting in managers to replace, you know, the likes of Luciano Spalletti in the first instance. Then he brought in some crazy additions in between that as well, you know. It just has been a bit of a car crash of a season for Napoli and De Laurentiis. Do you see there being a future? Because a lot of the fans kind of booed their own players and demanded them to get out of the club. You know, that's how bad it was in terms of atmosphere. But do you think there's any way for Napoli to come back and maybe push on for next season?
I think it's going to be really tough for them just purely because I think their star quality that they've got in the team is probably going to get picked up because obviously they haven't got any European football for next season. So I think Osimhen, it feels like he's out. I think he'll get picked up by somebody. And I think a lot of their top players from last season, I think they're going to get picked up. And it all comes back to if when they get rid of Osimhen, and they will get, hopefully for them, they'll get 8, even though they won't get as much as they would have this time last season, they might still get sort of 70, 80 million for him because he's clearly still a top player. But I think if they can recruit well with that money, and then really they're going to have to really strengthen their squad and pick a manager out from somewhere who's gonna get them out of this rut, because they're going to need they're too big a club to not be in Europe spots. And obviously after winning the league quite comfortably last season, to now see them, they're 10th, right? 10th.
Yes, yeah, they are 10th. Pretty terrible. I'll see where they currently stand right now, because Fiorentina's game, they are currently 9th as it stands now. 9th. So yes, so I personally, season. If I just kind of give my thoughts, I think this is going to be, like, as you alluded to, a rebuild It's going to need a project manager. Unfortunately, I don't think De Laurentiis is the kind of man or chairman, should I say, or even director of football. I don't know what he calls himself these days, but he kind of tries to instill himself as the man that looks after this club. And I don't know if he gives enough trust to whoever comes in as the manager, and that's been shown this season in particular. But I think you need someone that you can build around. Now, there were some perfect opportunities with the likes of Igor Tudor, who went to Lazio, and he's proved himself so far, and we'll allude to that later. But yeah, it's just one of those problems that, Osimhen looks inevitable to go. Is that going to annoy the likes of Kvaratskhelia if he starts to see the quality of the side dwindle? And, he probably doesn't want to be in a team that's struggling in the league, although he will give a lot of love to Napoli and the fan base. I suspect that's going to be a really deciding factor. So it could be that they have to back Kvaratskhelia, pay him a decent wage, because reportedly he's not even on a high wage either down there. So yeah, it'll be a fascinating summer, it's fair to say. But we'll move on, because we have to say Grande Gasperini, because we're talking about Gian Piero Gasperini masterminding Atalanta, and boy, is he masterminding them right now. So on Wednesday evening, they will be facing Juventus in the Coppa Italia final against Juventus. Before that, though, he masterminded them last night to a 2-1 win against Roma, and they comprehensively, Kieran, beat them. It was a fantastic showing from Atalanta. But in the recent games, Atalanta have been showing this. Now, obviously, it was probably highlighted to a lot of Premier League fans through the Liverpool match about how good this Atalanta squad have been. And this is kind of like the fourth or fifth rebuilds that Gasperini has kind of done at Atalanta, because he was brought in and he keeps on having to kind of change these sides through, selling players on. If you think about the players and talents he's had in the past, Rasmus Højlund only got sold last season, even though he was only there for the best part of a season anyway. He was brought in last season and he got sold immediately. So that's the kind of job. And just kind of put it into a better perspective, if you take the kind of wage structure that Atalanta are on right now in terms of the amount that they pay for wages of players, if you compare that to a Premier League standing, they'd only be 17th or 18th in that table, because they're behind the likes of Burnley when it comes to spending on wages of players. So that goes to show you what a fantastic job that not only Gasperini has done, but also the kind of main structure behind him in terms of that backroom staff and, the kind of structure of the club itself. And you can see it through the rebuild of the stadium as well. And this is a club, let's put it into perspective, they were a struggling side in Serie B when Gasperini first joined them. He got them promoted to Serie A. And since then, they've kind of flourished. They've been in Champions League spots. They've also been having European adventures. They're now in the final of the Europa League. This is just incredible. And it's just down to this man installing a bit of a philosophy, a bit like Thiago Motta. And I don't think he gets enough justice. I don't think he gets enough praise. He's never talked about for the big jobs. And maybe it's this season that's kind of highlighted it a bit more. But there's a lot of talk about Gasperini potentially being the next Italian manager because of the style of football, because he is 68 ultimately. So, I mean, from an outsider point of view, what do you think of Atalanta, and what do you think of their season as well, more importantly?
They've been unbelievable. I watched them occasionally in the league. I watched the Roma game, and they 2-1 didn't even do justice to the amount. Obviously, I know Roma got penalty and everything, but the 2-1 scoreline didn't do justice to how superior they were. But I think it's been an incredible season. I think like you say, the job that Gasperini's done to bring them up, and then a while ago, and then to now have them as a challenging for Europe. It's just sort of like a given that they're going to challenge for Europe. And this season especially, I've watched a lot more of them. So De Ketelara's fantastic.
Yeah,
Lookman, they've got some ridiculous talent in that team, and I think hopefully it doesn't get poached. And I'd like to see Gasperini stay there. But maybe if they win the Europa League against Leverkusen, which we'll see, that's going to be
you never
fantastic.
know.
It's going to be a
Hopefully
fantastic
no late
final.
winners from Leverkusen, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know what's happening if it's 1-0 Atalanta with 10 minutes to go. But yeah, I think it's going to be an amazing final, and I think whoever if Atalanta do win that final, maybe that is the best way for Gasperini to go out and maybe get the Italy job, or maybe be looked at for. I know he's 68, but who knows? Maybe if Bologna lose the manager, or Inter maybe could be snapping him up.
Well, we shall wait and see. But I
Yeah.
think bravo to Gasperini for the job that he's done at Atalanta. And as I alluded to, they did beat Roma. Roma were also gunning for that kind of fourth spot as well. But in this particular match, they were kind of lackluster. In particular, that first goal by Teketelero, where he kind of shifts like Mancini, and Mancini just going one way, he goes the other. I mean, it was a bit embarrassing for Roma, and Roma didn't really offer much in this match, so I think they'll be very disappointed by this performance. So I don't want to allude too much because we've got a lot of talking points still to go through, Kieran, and I'm going to allude to it because Atalanta still have an opportunity to overcome Juventus, not just on Wednesday night where they face them in the Coppa Italia, but also in the league, because they've got an extra game in hand over Juventus, which when you consider, we're going to move into Juventus because they are sliding. They have in 15 games only accumulated 15 points. So that's out of a possible 45 that they could have accumulated. They've only got 15 points. They struggled against a rock bottom Salernitana side. Now, Salernitana are no shifters by any stretch of imagination, and they're not been great footballing wise, but they made Juventus look ordinary. And if it wasn't for Wojciech Szczesny, I think the scoreline could have been really bad. And I think the atmosphere at the moment in Juventus in general seems quite toxic at the moment. But I think there's this kind of overwhelming thought that Allegri is on the books. He's on high wages. He's reported to be on 27 million euros, Kieran. That's per season. That's without bonuses as well. This man should be doing a lot more out of this squad, or getting a lot more out of this squad. They struggled to get an equaliser against rock bottom Salernitana, and they somehow still managed to be in the Champions League spots. So do you think, based on everything, do you think Champions League was what they needed, or do you think they should be achieving a lot more this season?
I think looking at from where they were to where they are now, I think they should be achieving a lot more. And I think with the wages, as you say, the wages they're giving Allegri are like astronomical, and also the some of the squad they've got is like, it's definitely, I think it's better than fourth. I think it's probably in the top two, maybe them and AC Milan around sort of level. They should be around where AC Milan were, but originally they were above AC Milan, and now they can't catch them. They're 7 points behind, and they might even drop down to they could drop. I don't think. Yeah, they could drop down to fifth.
They can still drop into fifth place. So as it currently stands, they would still be in the Champions League spots because of the coefficient with Italy. So by the virtue that Atalanta are in the Europa League as well. So this is the interesting dynamic. However, what I mean in terms of standings is that no way should Atalanta be overcoming Juventus, and in terms of like being higher in the league positionings. And also, when you consider, like, it was February, they were kind of toe to toe with Inter Milan, they're gunning them. As soon as they lost that game, the momentum completely went by the wayside. They completely lost their focus. It was almost like they conceded the title there and then. And from then onwards, the performances have been absolutely dreadful, to the point that you can't get behind this. And speaking to even Francesco, who's been on this podcast, he's a Juventus fan. He's just at despair. He doesn't watch Juventus games anymore. That's how bad it's become. Like, he doesn't want to watch his own side because he can predict what's going to happen. So I just, although it sounds like we're kind of biased and we hate Juventus, when we do for our rational reasons. However, it's been a terrible season as far as I'm concerned. I think it's just lucky by the virtue that Italy have that coefficient for this season that they make it into Champions League. But I don't know if that's going to be the saving grace. Even if they do win the Coppa Italia on Wednesday night, Kieran, I think that's not enough to save their season. And certainly for Allegri anyway, I think you just bin him off and hope that Thiago Motta does accept the role. But I am going to move on because we've got to talk about the relegation battle, because it has gone absolutely manic in Serie A. Because over the weekend, we saw a number of results. If we start off periodically, so starting on Friday night, we saw Frosinone lose at home to Inter 5-0. Inter absolutely demolished Frosinone, and that doesn't do any good for their kind of goal difference virtues at the moment, because they were on -20, brought them to -25. And if you combine that with today's results, obviously, Kieran, but I'll talk about the other results firstly. So Lazio winning 2-0 against Empoli. Now, Empoli move into the relegation zone courtesy of Udinese winning earlier today against Lecce 2-0. Sassuolo, unfortunately, couldn't get a draw against Genoa. They were gunning them. However, it was just a typical kind of season for Sassuolo where they can't defend. They had an own goal by Kumbula, who is their midfielder, conceded from a really stupid kind of lapse of concentration. He kind of hits him, goes into the net. So, yeah, I mean, and then on top of that, you've got Hellas Verona also losing at home to Torino. And we'll talk about that later because Rory, my co-host, was at that match. But this relegation battle, so if we kind of talk about the table, so Salernitana rock bottom at the moment on 20th, but then you've got in 19th position, so Sassuolo on 29 points, Empoli currently on 18th position with 32 points. Then above them, Frosinone on goal difference by a solitary goal ahead of them is on 32 points, but minus goal difference of 25. Empoli on -26. Then we've got Calgary in 16th with 33 points. Then in 15th, we've got Udinese after tonight's result. They currently find themselves on 33 points with a minus goal deficit of 17. And then in 14th position, we've got Hellas Verona on 34 points. So this is probably the tightest relegation battle that I've seen across Europe so far. Can you actually predict who's going to go down? Because this is where I thought a few weeks ago I had it sewn up, but actually now keep on changing my mind every week.
Yeah, well, I mean, I originally thought when I came on a few weeks ago, I think Rory asked me, who do I think is going to go down? I said Udinese, and today they seem to prove me wrong. But I think it's also sort of important to add that there's actually also 2 6-pointers still to happen. So we've got Empoli versus Udinese, don't we? And then we've also got Cagliari versus Sassuolo.
Yeah.
So they're two absolutely massive, and they're on the same match week as well. So there's 2 absolutely massive games to be played. I really can't. I think I'm looking at the run-ins now. I think Empoli. It all comes down to that Udinese Empoli game, because I don't think Empoli will have enough to do anything against Roma, and I think Sassuolo are down because I can't see them getting anything out of Lazio.
No.
So I would say, obviously we've got Salernitana down, but I would say as well, Frosinone's
they've got a really difficult one because they face Udinese, don't they?
Last game of the season.
Last game of the season, they've got away to Monza, who Monza mid-table as it currently stands. I'm just having a quick look at Hellas Verona. So next weekend, they're away to Salernitana, rock bottom, but then they're at home to Inter. So although Inter have sewn up the title, I don't know what side Inter are going to put out. I suspect they'll put a reserve 11 potentially for this match, but again, you're asking them to kind of fold in that respect, and they haven't, with the exception of losing to Sassuolo twice this season, they haven't lost to any other side in Serie A this season. So, but I'm also looking at Calgary, right? And like you say, Sassuolo probably, I would expect them to potentially get a point, I would say. But then last day of the season at home to Fiorentina. Calgary good at home. But this is the thing. You're kind of, this is going to go to the wire. This is definitely going to go down to the wire. Now, I seem to remember initially I called this as Salernitana, Sassuolo, and Udinese to go down. This was weeks ago before Fabio Cannavaro has come into the role. Now, Udinese, we kind of speculated last week's show, you know, they're this kind of staple of Serie A. It would be a shame to see them go down. But however, they've been so poor this season footballing wise. So it's taken, the Fabio Cannavaro effect to take place. And, they've started to grind out these results. They're probably too good out of all the teams to go down, personally, based on the quality of players that they've got in their squad. But, we know this. It's not about the quality of the players in your squad. It's all about how they play as a team. I've got a feeling it's going to be between Empoli and Frosinone to go down, though. Now it just feels like them two, because if I remember rightly, Empoli last day of the season, they're at home to Roma. So it all depends on the standings of Roma as it currently stands. I mean, would you agree, or do you think there's going to be a bit of a twist in that as well?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, Frosinone or Empoli. I mean, no one around that area is safe, as we know. There's still going to be many, because you can just picture it if Empoli need a win against Roma and they just somehow pull one out of the bag. But like, I would say it's between Frosinone and Empoli for that final spot, and I think Sassuolo are out of it unless they can somehow get. They really kind of need 6 points, but I'd say if they can get 4 points out of Cagliari and Lazio, they potentially might do it. But I can't see. I don't think they get 4 points out of that. I just don't see it happening.
Well, listener, if you are listening to us right now, I'm sure you're going to say something different to us. So we'll kind of update you next week and see where we currently stand with this relegation battle. Because
they'll have all swapped round by then, won't they?
It would have all swapped round and everyone's on equal points or something stupid like that. So it is going to be fascinating. But I will push on because I want to kind of highlight Rory, my co-host, who went to the Hellas Verona match against Torino. Obviously, he was really looking forward to this, and he was joined by his friend, and obviously took in Hellas Verona losing at home to Torino. But one of the things that he did highlight was his experience in the ground, where unfortunately he did come across a number of Hellas Verona fans mocking the Torino fan base. In particular, what they were doing was mocking them with airplanes kind of diving down. And this is in reference to the famous tragedy of the Torino players in the 1930s, where unfortunately they had a crash with an airplane flying back from a friendly in Portugal. And unfortunately, everyone perished with their lives in particular. But this is just to highlight, obviously, the fact that unfortunately there is still a society cultural aspect that's wrong within the kind of attendances in Serie A. Obviously, we've seen some really terrible acts this season, Kieran, with racism in the likes of Udinese, for example. And it's unfortunately, we've just seen it boil over with this kind of act. Obviously, from my point of view, calling on the league to actually just address this issue. But I thought it's really important that we kind of address it as a podcast, just to say, unfortunately, as much as we love Serie A for what it brings us in terms of joy of the footballing and the kind of calamity moments like you have with the relegation battle that we see right now, unfortunately, we do have to kind of face facts and say, there is this element within the Italian game, and it's not just isolated to Italy. Obviously, there's a number of different leagues that have very similar acts. But yeah, it's a bit disheartening when you kind of see these acts live as well, because I think that's probably what pulled it more to life for Rory. But yeah, just from describing that, I mean, there's no place for that in football, is there?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, no one wants to go to the stadium and experience sort of an atmosphere like that in terms of hearing all these tragedy chants and everything. And it you put it perfectly, really. There's just no place for it in football. And I mean, it's something that needs to get addressed by the league, because when the racism thing got addressed by the league, I'm not saying it solved it by any stretch of the imagination, but it definitely does. It's more than just a slap on the wrist. It's a we just can't tolerate this. And I think a statement maybe isn't enough. Maybe they need, if they have to issue out fines, they have to issue out fines, because there'll be people in that stadium that have lost family members and things like that. And it's just, it's not acceptable. And I think it should definitely be addressed in the proper way.
Well, let's kind of conclude, Kieran. We'll move off this topic and talk about Benvenuti to Parma e Como, because as I'm wearing right now, for those that are watching on the live stream, I've got a Parma shirt, and we do welcome them back to Serie A. I think it's been an exodus of around approximately 5 years now that we haven't seen Parma in the top flight. I remember nostalgically, Kieran, seeing the kind of likes of Fabio Cannavaro and, Lilian Thuram kind of donning the Parma shirts back. So it's beautiful to kind of see them back in the Serie A, and that was confirmed last weekend. But Como is another fascinating story in itself because, Como, it's just been weird how it's kind of come together anyway, from my point of view. On Friday night, we saw Jamie Vardy take a visit to Como Stadium to take in the game. And obviously, so many different personnel that we'll recognize, likes of Thierry Henry being the main investor at that club, Cesc Fabregas being the assistant manager currently at Como. And then we've got Dennis Wise for a Millwall connection. There you go. Dennis Wise being the director of football at Como. So this is exciting times for Como. Then we've also got Patrick Cutrone. If you remember him, he was the ex-Milan striker who then had a brief period in the Premier League with Wolves. Never was able to kind of recapture that kind of form that propelled him into those kind of higher echelons of those clubs. But Cutrone is back at Como. He had a fantastic season this season. He's the most valuable player and top goal scorer for them. So it's a beautiful moment because Cutrone is also from Como originally as well. So beautiful story in itself. But Como are a fascinating team. Obviously, historically they've been bankrupt twice as well. But yeah, beautiful scenery. I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures of the stadium as well on that coastline.
Down the south
of Italy. It's a fascinating kind of stadium there as well. But yeah, are you excited to see Cesc Fabregas and Como in Serie A?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's like a fairy tale story, isn't it? They were relegated to Serie D, obviously the fourth tier, and then they've worked their way up after being, like you say, they bankrupted twice. The last time they were in the Serie A was 02-03, so they haven't been in the top division for over 20 years. So I think it's just a fantastic story, and it's brilliant to see some of for me personally, some of the icons I grew up watching, like for instance, Cesc Fabregas is like a real sort of childhood icon of mine because of his era sort of was timed for when I was sort of growing up watching it. So it's brilliant to see him doing well in a management role, and also just good to see Como back in the top division, and also Parma, of course. It's great to see them back where they belong. So yeah.
I cannot wait to see them because actually in the Coppa Italia this season, they've actually surprised a few of the bigger teams. Last season, they almost shocked Inter Milan at Inter. So, I'm really hoping that we see the Parma side that was really pushing into the top half of the table. And it's beautiful to see them back in Serie A. But they could also be joined by some ex-Serie A clubs. So I'll just mention in the playoff mix currently in Serie B, we've got the likes of Venezia, who were in Serie A not that long ago. Cremonese last season, they were in Serie A. Potentially, we could see them back. Catanzaro, they're a favourite. Palermo, everyone's favourite if you want a pink shirt. Sampdoria, and we've also got Brescia, who are owned by Massimo Cellino. So probably the least likely of everyone's kind of choices potentially to be back in Serie A. But there's a lot of nostalgia with Brescia being originally one of those kind of established clubs in Serie A. So it's all up for grabs. Sampdoria also in particular, I have to call out with Andrea Pirlo at the helm. It wasn't looking too pretty. He's managed to turn it around and he's managed to get them into the playoff mix. So we shall wait and see, listeners and viewers. We shall wait and see if he can bring that magic and get them back into Serie A, because that would be beautiful to see another Genoa club also, to bring back the Genoa derby as well. So yes, let's see what happens there. But on that point, Kieran, we are going to say that is all of the football for now. So if you've joined us live, beautiful to have you on and great that you've actually watched us. Really appreciate if you can hit the likes and subscribes on YouTube, and obviously on our social media channels. We are mostly at Anglo-Italian Pod, with the exception of Twitter, where we are at Italian Anglo Pod. Just a bit of housekeeping as well, just to say that we are planning to do some pods soon. Unfortunately, just due to the fact that our social lives have got in the way of everything, me and Rory haven't been able to get regular with our podcast. So we will be back, hopefully, to kind of do an end of season kind of review. And we're hoping to have a few guests to join us on that. But we've also got the Euro reviews as well. So we're obviously going to start previewing the Euros that are going to happen during this summer. Kieran, I cannot wait for the Euros. I'm sure it's going to be fascinating. Different style of topic, I'm sure, that's for sure. But yeah, please ensure that you join us for that as well. And we'll try and do our best to cover it, because Rory will be in Germany. He'll be joined by a lot of our guests that have been on the podcast and live stream this season as well. So we're hoping to do a little bit of like a cheeky exclusive down there as well, to get them on the podcast as well. But Kieran, before we kind of bid you farewell, we've got to ensure that everyone promotes you as well and hears about you. So where can people find your work, more importantly?
So I'm mainly on Twitter, KHAnalytics02. And then, I'm currently finishing my degree. And then once I finish that, I'm going to be posting a lot more regularly on there. But I do post sort of weekly on there at the moment. So, yeah.
Good stuff. Well, with that, we shall bid you farewell. Great having you on, Kieran, more importantly, and thank you for taking us through all of the football. But more importantly, folks, you at home, enjoy your footballing week, and hopefully enjoy the weekend as well. So we will see you for now. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, time me on. Thank you.